In this video, I'm going to talk about a mental framework that is the foundation for most of my coaching, and I'd have to say for my approach to life. The model. What is a model? A model is a representation or a simplification of a thing, of a structure, of a system. And the purpose of a model is to help us understand the system. By taking out extraneous details, by shrinking things, we can get insight that we wouldn't get looking at the entire thing. Or we can use models of things that don't yet exist to understand better how they work and how they are. So if you think of an architectural model, it might be a huge skyscraper or a campus, for example, that somebody makes a representation of out of cardboard that fits on a table. And with that, you can look at it, you can walk around it, you can get some insight into how the parts work together without having to have the whole thing in front of you. And the simplification is a big part of it. So the model we're going to talk about today is the model. This is the name that my coaching school applies to this. And this is a simplification and representation of the human experience. It's got 5 elements. And these are C, T, F, A, and R. And so I'm going to describe and talk about these 5 elements. So the first of these, I'm going to start here in the middle, is feelings. And I also use the word emotions interchangeably. And I know that I'm always going on about feelings, about how important they are. And I'm going to do that again right now for 2 reasons. One, because they are important. And secondly, because if you're anything like me, you're not good at feelings. You've not spent your life being very tuned into your feelings. I can say for myself, I've spent most of my life being pretty oblivious to my feelings. I've prided myself on my rational thought, my logicalness, my intelligence, meaning in an academic and in a book way, not my emotional intelligence. And when I talk about oblivious, I would have said, I don't have many feelings. I'm either okay or I'm irritated or pissed off. That was my emotional vocabulary. Sad, I'm never sad. I don't have guilt or regret, I would have told you, because I was turning all that into anger. That's where all that resentment and irritation came from. So feelings are important, and to even get more specific, they're important for a few reasons. Everything we want because of how we think it will make us feel. Sometimes money for some people would make them feel secure. That's why they want money. Nobody wants money. It's only what it represents. It's what it can do. Or maybe you want money because of its perceived ability to create social status for you, for example. Also, tremendous amounts of what we do in life are in pursuit of avoiding certain feelings. So think of the lengths we go through to avoid feeling embarrassed or to avoid feeling rejected. So they drive a lot of our actions to avoid certain feelings. So we're either gravitating towards certain feelings of comfort, security, connection. We're doing things to avoid feelings like embarrassment or regret. People do a lot of stuff to avoid regret. So, avoidance. And then finally, feelings are really important because they are the fuel for our actions. So that's the next element here. That's what the A is actions. So actions are the things we do and the things we don't do. So if you're going around thinking, I don't know why I eat so much junk food. I don't know why I can't stop after 3 beers. I don't know why I keep getting in conflicts with such and such. Well, the why is because there's a feeling there fueling that action. That is always the case. This is particularly clear when we think about the things that we don't do, for example, like we don't exercise. Even though maybe we're a person that thinks that exercise is good, we should exercise, I intend to exercise, I want to exercise, but we find ourselves not exercising. It's because there's a feeling in the way that is not fueling the action of exercising. The feeling might be as simple as apathy, that's a feeling, or it might be something more like shame, for example, that gets in the way of doing the action of exercising. And absolutely, if we're somebody that finds ourselves drinking 3 beers when we said we'd stop at 2, that's because of a feeling is fueling that action. It might be the feeling of just raw desire for that 3rd beer, or it might be one of these avoidance things, like, man, I feel kind of awful right now. And again, we can experience that in a way that creates the action of drinking without even being very explicitly aware of the fact that we are feeling some negative emotion. So feelings, important, they're the fuel for our actions, the things that we do and we don't do. So now let's talk about what's the T. T is our thoughts. These are the sentences in our brain. And maybe they're also the sentences that come out of our mouth. Very often the things we say are our thoughts, but we have a whole lot of thoughts that we don't say, of course. Some recent research that says that we typically have something like 6,000 thoughts a day. And in this model, this representation of the human experience, we're talking really about about words, about language. So this model is not going to work very well for my dog. I guess he thinks in terms of his thoughts are images, presumably not words. So that's what we're talking about here. Sentences in our brain made up of words. And you can see that by virtue of the position of T here, my premise is that our thoughts cause our feelings. The things we think, it's our interpretation of the world, it's those sentences that cause us to experience an emotion. I want to further distinguish between this. Feelings can be described in one word. A feeling is not a sentence, is not a concept. Words that describe feelings might be happy, sad, angry, irritated, regretful, guilty, shame or shameful, satisfied, excited, enthusiastic. Those are all feelings. And the thoughts would be the sentences that were in our brain that are making us feel excited, for example. In the other video, I've talked about this and I'm going to represent it here. Feelings are experienced in our body. Even if we're spent most of our life, like I have, oblivious to that, I didn't know that. But the reason feelings matter is because they're physical. And our experience here on the world is in these bodies. And when stuff's happening in our bodies, it gets our attention. We have a headache, it gets our attention. We get poked with a sharp stick, we attend to it. When our physiology changes because of the thoughts create feelings and our heart rate gets jacked up and we breathe shallow, we pay attention to it, even if only at a subconscious level, but it matters. And so other manifestations, physical sensations from feelings might be change in our blood flow. For example, fear is going to move blood away from our digestive area and get it to our limbs so we can act, or the muscle tension that we feel from maybe irritation is our body's preparation to do something. When we get sort of abstract sensations like a pit in our stomach or a feeling of something in our chest, it's all physiological stuff that we're noticing and experiencing as feelings. So feelings can be described in one word, and the shorthand way to talk about the physicalness of feelings is to say that they are vibrations in our body. They fuel our actions, and they're created by our thoughts, the sentences in our brain. Now I need to talk about, I'm going to leave thoughts there, and we're going to talk about circumstances. So technically, a circumstance is also a thought. For it to matter, has to come into our brain, and we have to have a sentence about it. But circumstances are a particular subset of thoughts in that they are facts, the raw, unadulterated facts that we're thinking about make up the circumstances. If I say that it's a beautiful day, that's a thought. That's not a circumstance, because somebody else may not, they don't know what a beautiful day is. They may not agree that it's a beautiful day. Beautiful is purely an evaluation. It's a judgment. So I'm going to be lazy and say it's a nice day. That's not a circumstance. If we think about an interaction with a person, and if I say that my wife yells at me every time I don't take my plate into the kitchen after dinner, that is not a circumstance. That's a thought. So, for example, yell. She would say, "Oh, I'm not yelling. I'm just saying the words." So yell is absolutely a thought. It's an assessment. It's an evaluation. My daughter, when she got to middle school age and older, used to always say, "Stop yelling at me, Dad." And I would always say, "I'm not yelling at you." So the fact that we couldn't agree on whether we were yelling or not meant that it can't be a circumstance. It's purely a thought. And in that sense with my wife, when I said my wife always yells at me, she'd probably say, "Well, I don't always yell at you. I actually only yell at you about every other time." And that may or not be, the fact that we can't agree on whether it was always or not means that it can't be a circumstance. It's a thought. And the point, the reason it's very important to make this distinction between circumstances and thoughts is that we can't change circumstances, at least right now. If our circumstance is that I have $1,000 in the bank, I can change that over time. I could do some things to make some money and not spend money and save money. But in the moment, and these models, it's very often useful to think of them in the moment, that's a circumstance. So we kind of can't change circumstances right now. But we can always change our thoughts. And when we start to see that most of what's going on in our head and that is affecting our life, that is creating feelings, that are fueling actions, that are creating some results. I'll talk about results in a little bit. And we see that much of it is just sentences that don't have to be true for us, that we don't have to think, that we don't have to believe in. And the best way to see that is to distinguish those from the relatively few facts that are involved in our life. Then we start to get power over our human experience. And that's what this is all about. So, thoughts can be changed, presumably. Circumstances, at least in this short term on the micro scale, can't. And we want to realize how much of our life is subject to our control and our power. And finally, again, understanding that thoughts is what creates all the rest of our life makes it something that's worth paying attention to. And now I want to finish off by talking about results. And I'm going to make some comparisons between results and circumstances. So the results are the things that we create in our lives with our actions. Since our actions come from our thoughts as fueled by our feelings, our results are created by our thoughts. So results can be very tangible. For example, I weigh 133 pounds right now. That is a result. I've created that in my life. And I can say that actually in the last week, I lost about 2 pounds. So that's also a result. I could look at my checkbook balance, and I could see that as a result. And I could look at how much money I made last week, and I could see that as a result. So sometimes results are very concrete, very, very solid, quantifiable like that. Results can also be qualitative. I could say, I have a good marriage. So that's also a thought. But if I want to think that I have created a good marriage based on a continual set of actions and the way I relate to her and the way that I perceive that she relates to me, I can feel like I've created that result of a good marriage. And I can contrast that, for example, with one of my other marriages, which was not good. And I can see that as a result I created. So the evaluation of our relationships can be a result. Again, it's also a T since it's not factual, but this is just a model. It's a representation. So we can kind of play a little bit loose with results as a way to, and use this then as a constructive tool to dissect and troubleshoot and re-engineer our life experience. Now, some results also seem to be circumstances. So let's take this 133 pounds, for example. Through the course of my life, I have created the result of 133 pounds, and now it's my C. Now I have an option as to how I want to think about that. I can have a thought that, man, I'm way too skinny. And that's probably going to create some sort of a feeling maybe of insecurity, or, you know, I'm thinking to myself, it's too skinny. That's probably not going to be a positive emotion, which might drive some action, create some new result. Or I can think, that's my perfect weight. And that's going to create a different feeling, action, and result. We could take as a circumstance, say that this is one of my clients who's drinking, and by 7:30 on Friday afternoon, they've drank 2 beers. I guess you could say that that's a result. Maybe the buzz that they have is a result. But now, that's a circumstance. How do you want to think about that circumstance? So let's say that the circumstance was you drank 2 beers and let's see. Drank 2. One thought was I was supposed to stop at 1. All right, let's see. I was supposed to drink 0. What kind of feeling is that going to create? Probably some guilt or something like that. What action will that create? Depends. It might create the action of not drinking, but for a lot of drinkers, guilt is one of the big things that people drink to avoid, that feeling of being guilty, of being a bad person for drinking too much. So for a given person, we can look at their specific model and see is that action to drink or not. So that's the model. Let me leave it there for now, and we'll come back and talk about this in more detail.